Captain Eric Nolan had always prided himself on his calm demeanor. A seasoned space explorer, he had been on countless missions across the stars. But nothing could have prepared him for the disaster that struck when his ship, the Pioneer, was caught in a mysterious energy storm near the edge of the galaxy. The storm, unlike anything Eric had ever encountered, disabled the ship's navigation systems and sent it crashing to an unknown planet. When he regained consciousness, the ship was in ruins. Eric's first instinct was to check for survivors, but the storm had left the crew stranded in a hostile environment. He was alone. The air was thick with the scent of unfamiliar plants, and the ground beneath his boots felt unsteady, like it was constantly shifting. With little more than a broken communicator and his emergency kit, he set off in search of shelter. Days passed without any sign of rescue. Eric's food supply dwindled, and the harsh conditions of the planet wore on him. The wild terrain was unforgiving, with jagged cliffs, dense forests, and rocky deserts stretching as far as the eye could see. It was a world untouched by human hands, where every step felt like a battle to survive. He had long stopped trying to repair the ship. The damage was beyond his skills, and no one would be able to help him out here. He had to focus on finding a way to stay alive until he could signal for help, if there was anyone out there listening. But then, on the 7th day, Arik stumbled upon something unexpected. As he made his way through a dense thicket of trees, he heard a faint sound. A low, pained groan. He froze, his instincts kicking in. It was the sound of a wounded creature, or perhaps another person. His heart raced as he cautiously approached the source of the noise. There, lying in a small clearing, was an alien woman. Her skin was a strange shade of purple, and her features were unlike anything Eric had ever seen. Her face was long and angular, with sharp ridges that ran across her cheeks and forehead. Her eyes, large and dark, seemed to stare right through him. She was dressed in tattered clothing, her body covered in scars that looked like they had been etched by years of battle. The alien woman's breath was shallow, and she was barely conscious. Eric's heart softened. Despite her terrifying appearance, something about her spoke to him. An unspoken vulnerability, a plea for help. Without hesitation, he knelt beside her. His medical training kicked in as he quickly assessed her injuries. She had been wounded by some sort of weapon. Laser burns and deep gashes marred her arms and legs. Arik tore a piece of fabric from his shirt to use as a bandage and carefully wrapped it around the most serious wounds. He had no idea who she was or where she came from, but right now, that didn't matter. She needed help. Her eyes flickered open, and she tried to sit up, only to wince in pain. She spoke in a language Arik didn't understand, her words soft and broken. He could hear the fear in her voice. "Don't move," he said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder to keep her still. "You're safe now." The woman's gaze locked onto his. Her expression was one of disbelief, as if she couldn't quite understand what he was doing. She muttered something again, this time louder, but Eric still couldn't make out the words. He offered a comforting smile, though he knew she couldn't possibly see any reason to trust him. "I'm Eric," he said slowly, hoping she might understand. "I'm here to help you." The alien woman stared at him for a long moment before speaking again, this time in a voice that was filled with sadness. "My face, it is ugly and terrifying," she said, her words heavy with self-loathing. Eric felt a pang of sympathy for her. He had seen many injured soldiers and civilians in his career, but something about the way she spoke made him realize how deep her pain ran. She didn't just fear for her life. She feared her appearance, her very existence. "No," he replied firmly, looking directly into her eyes. "You're very beautiful?" The woman blinked in surprise, clearly not expecting such an answer. Eric wasn't sure if she could fully comprehend what he meant, but he could see a flicker of something in her eyes. Perhaps it was hope. Perhaps it was disbelief. She looked away, her gaze shifting to the ground as she spoke again, though this time her voice seemed to crack. No one has ever said that to me before." Arik didn't know what to say. His words felt hollow in the face of her pain. He had heard many sad stories in his time, but this was different. This wasn't just about survival. This was about something deeper, something that had haunted this woman for as long as she could remember. "I know," Arik said quietly, "but I mean it." "You're beautiful." The alien woman fell silent, her eyes scanning his face as if trying to determine if he was lying. But Arik didn't flinch. He was telling the truth. He wasn't sure what he had expected from this encounter. Maybe a moment of gratitude or a chance to get more information. But this woman, who seemed so different from anything he had ever seen, had changed the course of his mission in an instant. The silence between them stretched, and for a moment, Arik thought she might say something, anything to break the tension. But instead, she just closed her eyes, as if taking in his words. He could only wonder what she had been through in her life to make her so distrustful, so certain of her own ugliness. When she spoke again, her voice was soft, almost like a whisper. "I am Lyra," she said. "I am the last of my people." Arik's heart sank. "What happened to your people?" he asked gently, his curiosity piqued. Lyra shook her head. "They were hunted," she said, her voice barely audible. "We were feared for our appearance. My people were once powerful, but they were betrayed by those we trusted. Now I am alone, the last one." The weight of her words settled heavily in the air. Arik didn't know what to say. He had no answers for her, no easy solutions, but for the first time in days, he didn't feel quite so alone himself. They were both stranded on this planet, both broken in their own ways, but perhaps, together, they could find a way to survive. Over the following days, Arik and Lyra settled into a routine. Despite her injuries, Lyra insisted on helping Arik with whatever tasks she could manage. Her strength surprised him. She was quick and precise, even with her body scarred and worn. Arik had never encountered anyone quite like her, and though he had trained to survive in the harshest of conditions, nothing prepared him for the complexity of Lyra's situation. As they worked together, Arik learned more about the alien woman. She was unlike any human he had ever met. Her knowledge of the planet was extensive, though she spoke little about her past. Instead, she focused on surviving, on keeping them both alive. One afternoon, as they worked to gather resources near a river, Arik found himself studying Lyra once again. Her movements were graceful, despite the way her body had been scarred. It was as though she carried a deep sadness within her, a sadness that shaped every action she made. He saw the way she hesitated when touching certain objects, or how her eyes seemed to grow distant when the sun dipped low in the sky. "I still don't understand," Arik said, taking a break from his work to sit beside her. "You mentioned your people were hunted." "Who did this to you?" Lyra paused, looking down at the river's surface, her reflection distorted in the flowing water. She sighed, and for the first time, Arik saw the weight of the years she had carried with her. "We were once a powerful race, Arik," she began, her voice quiet, but filled with a deep, tragic sorrow. "We were known for our strength, both physical and mental. Our people could harness energy like no other race in the galaxy. We were protectors, guardians of the energy source that could change the balance of the universe. It was our duty." She paused, her eyes distant, as she recalled the past. Arik stayed silent, letting her words wash over him. But our power became our curse. There were others, races who envied what we had. They feared us because we were different. The markings on my face, the ridges, the scars, those were what defined us. But what they didn't understand was that we wore those scars with pride. We were born to protect, born to fight. Yet, to the outside world, we were nothing more than monsters. Arik listened closely, absorbing her story. He had never known what it was like to be judged solely on one's appearance. As a human, he had always been able to hide his true self behind his uniform, his training, his status. But Lyra had no such luxury. Her very being had been weaponized, and for that, she had been betrayed.
Our allies turned on us, Lyra continued, her voice thick with emotion.
Those we had trusted, they saw us as too dangerous, too unpredictable. And when they saw an opportunity, they turned on us, wiping out my people. They hunted us down one by one, until I was the last one left. Eric could hear the pain in her voice, but it was more than just that. There was a hint of anger, too. A quiet, simmering rage that had been building inside her for years. I don't know why I survived, she whispered, almost to herself. I don't know why I was spared, but I carry the weight of my people's deaths with me. Every day, every moment, I remember. Eric didn't know what to say. What could he possibly offer to someone who had experienced such loss, such betrayal? All he could do was sit beside her in silence, offering the only comfort he knew, his presence. The next few days passed quickly. Eric began to feel a sense of camaraderie with Lyra that he hadn't felt in a long time. They made progress on repairing the ship, and though they were still far from finished, there was a quiet optimism between them. Eric found himself looking forward to their daily tasks, not just because they needed to survive, but because he enjoyed her company. It wasn't just her beauty, though. That was undeniable. It was the way she moved, the way her strength radiated despite the emotional walls she had built around herself. Lyra was a force, and Eric admired her for it. But even as they worked together, the shadow of the mercenaries lingered. Lyra had been reluctant to speak of them at first, but Eric's instincts told him they were still out there, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. One evening, as the two of them sat by a fire they had built to keep warm, Eric finally brought up the mercenaries. "We can't keep running forever," he said, looking at her. "I don't want to leave this place until we're ready, but there's something I need to know. You're not telling me everything about the mercenaries. Why are they after you?" Lyra stared into the flames, her eyes flickering with a mix of fear and determination. "They don't just want me," she said softly. "They want the energy, the power that my people once guarded. The mercenaries are after something far more dangerous than just me. They know that if they control the energy, they'll have the power to conquer the galaxy." Eric felt a chill run down his spine. He had known that this planet held secrets. Secrets that could change everything. But hearing the gravity of what they were dealing with made it all the more real. "How do we stop them?" Eric asked, his tone serious. Lyra looked at him, her eyes burning with a fire he had not seen before. "We stop them by using the energy for ourselves," she said. "We must find the source and secure it. If we don't, they'll use it to destroy everything." Eric nodded, understanding the weight of her words. The task ahead was monumental, but they had no choice. It was the only way to ensure their survival, and the survival of countless others who might fall under the mercenaries' rule. But the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. There were obstacles to overcome, dangers they had yet to face, and a deep, growing bond between them that neither of them fully understood. That night, as Eric lay in his makeshift shelter, he couldn't help but think about Lyra. She had been through so much, yet she stood strong. He had been trained for survival, for conflict. But this was different. This wasn't just about living. It was about fighting for something greater than himself. Lyra's scars were a reminder of the battles she had fought. They were a testament to her strength, not her weakness. And despite what she believed, despite what she had been told, all her life, she was not ugly. She was beautiful, inside and out. The thought of her scars, her painful past, reminded him of his own struggles. Arik had lost people too, friends, family, crew members, but he had always carried on. Perhaps it was the same for Lyra. Perhaps her scars were a way of carrying her people with her, a way of honoring them. The next day, as they set out to explore deeper into the planet, Eric felt a renewed sense of purpose. The journey ahead was uncertain, but with Lyra by his side, he felt stronger. Together, they would find a way to stop the mercenaries and protect the energy source that could change everything. And perhaps, in the process, they would both find what they were truly searching for: redemption, peace, and a future where they no longer had to hide from the past. Eric and Lyra had been preparing for days. The landscape around them, though beautiful, held secrets they had yet to uncover. The dense forest gave way to rocky hills and sharp cliffs that led deeper into the heart of the planet. Lyra had explained that the energy source was hidden somewhere in these cliffs, a place that only a few knew about, and even fewer had survived trying to find it. Yet, despite the risks, they knew they had no choice but to continue. Their journey had not been easy. Every day brought new obstacles: treacherous terrain, harsh weather, and, of course, the lingering threat of the mercenaries. But as the days passed, Eric found himself growing closer to Lyra. The trust between them was unspoken, yet stronger than anything words could convey. He saw her scars now not as marks of a painful past, but as symbols of her strength and survival. Her power, once something she feared, had become something she embraced. It was a part of her, just as much as her fierce spirit. One morning, as they trekked along a narrow path high on a cliffside, the air thick with mist, Eric glanced over at Lyra. The sun had barely risen, casting long shadows across the rocky landscape. Lyra moved with purpose, her steps confident and sure, but her eyes remained distant, as if lost in thought. "Do you think about it often?" Eric asked, breaking the silence. Lyra glanced at him, raising an eyebrow. "Think about what?" "Your people. What happened to them?" For a moment, she was silent, her gaze fixed on the path ahead. "Every day," she replied, softly. "I think about them every day. I think about what they could have been, what we could have been, if only we had been accepted." Eric nodded, understanding more than she knew. "It's hard," he said, his voice gentle, "to carry that kind of weight." Lyra paused and looked at him, her eyes filled with an emotion he couldn't quite place. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "You don't know what it's like to be hunted for just being yourself. To have everything you once believed in ripped away because of something you can't change." Arik wanted to argue, to tell her that he too had lost people, had fought battles he didn't want to fight. But something in her voice stopped him. It wasn't that she was angry with him. It was something deeper, a pain that ran through her words, through her very being. He had never truly understood what it meant to be hunted, to be constantly on the run. He had never known that kind of fear. "I might not understand everything," Eric said after a long pause, "but I understand the feeling of not belonging, of wanting to find a place where you're accepted, where you don't have to hide who you are." Lyra looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time Eric saw a flicker of something like hope in her eyes. It was brief, but it was there. She nodded, almost imperceptibly, before turning back to the path. "Maybe you do understand," she said softly. They continued their journey in silence, the weight of their words hanging between them. They had both lost so much, yet here they were, together, trying to find something they could both believe in again. As the sun began to set, casting an orange glow across the horizon, they reached the base of a massive rock formation. The energy source, Lyra explained, was hidden deep within a network of caves inside the cliff face. But she warned Eric that they were not alone. The mercenaries were still out there, and they would stop at nothing to claim the energy for themselves. Lyra led the way into the caves, her every step measured and cautious. The tunnels were narrow, and the air inside was cool and damp. The walls were smooth, almost as though they had been carved by hand. Though Lyra told Eric that this was the work of time and the planet's natural forces. They walked for what seemed like hours, the darkness of the caves pressing in around them. Finally, they reached a large chamber, its walls covered in strange symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and atop it a crystal, a jagged shard of light that seemed to hum with energy. Eric felt its power the moment he stepped into the chamber. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced before, a deep, resonant force that seemed to vibrate in the very air around them. "This is it," Lyra whispered, her voice filled with awe. "This is the heart of my people's power, the energy that sustained us, the source of everything." Eric stepped closer to the pedestal, his fingers hovering just above the crystal. He could feel the heat radiating from it, the potential it held. But as he reached out to touch it, he heard a noise behind him, a faint click, followed by the sound of boots echoing off the stone floor. "Not so fast!" a voice called out, low and menacing. Eric spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. From the shadows, a group of mercenaries emerged, their guns raised and aimed directly at them. The leader, a tall man with cold, calculating eyes, stepped forward. "We've been following you for days," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "You didn't think we'd just let you take the energy, did you?" Lyra stepped in front of Eric, her posture tense, her eyes hard. "You won't get it," she said, her voice steady but filled with warning. "This energy is not for you. It's not for anyone who seeks to control it." The leader chuckled, his eyes scanning the chamber. "We'll see about that," he said, motioning for his men to move forward. "You don't stand a chance." Auric felt the tension in the room rise. The mercenaries were closing in, their weapons trained on them. Lyra's body language was a mixture of defiance and determination. But Eric could see the fear behind her eyes. She had been running for so long, fighting for so long. And now, they had come to take the last thing she had left.
"You don't have to do this,"
Eric said, his voice firm.
"You don't have to fight us."
"We can work together," the leader sneered. "It's too late for that," he said, his hand resting on the trigger of his weapon. In that moment, Eric knew what they had to do. There was no more time for negotiation, no more time for hesitation. Lyra looked at him, and he saw the unspoken understanding pass between them. She was ready. She had accepted what needed to be done. Together, they could protect the energy. Together, they could stop these mercenaries from claiming it. Without another word, Lyra stepped forward, her hands raised. Energy crackled around her, the power of her people surging through her as she drew it from the crystal. The air grew thick with power, and the mercenaries took a step back, fear flashing in their eyes. Eric fired first, his aim true, and the mercenaries scattered. But it was Lyra who truly unleashed the power, the force of her energy pushing them back with a single wave. The crystal pulsed with light, and the room shook as the mercenaries stumbled, struggling to regain their footing. In the chaos, Eric and Lyra fought together, Eric with his weapons, and Lyra with the raw power of her people. The mercenaries didn't stand a chance. As the last of them fell to the ground, Eric turned to Lyra, his heart pounding. She stood tall, her breathing heavy but steady. The energy from the crystal still hummed in the air, and for a moment, everything was still. "We did it," Eric said, his voice filled with awe. Lyra looked at him, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the crystal.
"This is just the beginning," she said softly. "Now we protect it."
"Now we make sure it never falls into the wrong hands again." Eric nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. The mercenaries might have been defeated, but there were others out there who would stop at nothing to claim the energy for themselves. Together, they would ensure that the power of Lyra's people would be kept safe. And together, they would find a way to give her people the future they deserved. The aftermath of the battle in the cave was quieter than Eric had expected. The energy from the crystal still lingered in the air, but the mercenaries were gone, defeated. The silence that followed was almost overwhelming. Eric stood there, his breathing heavy, his heart still racing from the fight. He had never been in a battle quite like that, and though the outcome was in their favor, the price of victory was still unclear. Lyra, on the other hand, seemed calm. Her hands were still slightly raised, the energy from her people swirling around her like a protective shield. She didn't seem to notice the stillness in the air, the way the weight of what they had just done seemed to press in on him. Her focus was entirely on the crystal, and Eric could see the way her body tensed, as though she was still preparing for something else, something worse. "Are they all gone?" Eric asked quietly, stepping closer to her. Lyra nodded, her expression unreadable. "Yes, but they won't be the last," she said, her voice heavy with the knowledge that this was only the beginning. "There are more out there. Others who want this power, and they will come for it, no matter the cost." Arik understood what she meant. The battle had been intense, but the real danger lay ahead. The mercenaries might have been defeated, but the energy they had just fought for was far too valuable to be left unprotected. They couldn't stay here forever. "We can't let it fall into the wrong hands," Lyra continued, her eyes still fixed on the crystal. "We must protect it, Eric. I don't know if I can do this alone." Eric looked at her, seeing the exhaustion in her eyes, the burden of her people's history, and the weight of the power she now carried. He had seen that look before, in soldiers who had been pushed to their limits. He knew that it wasn't just the mercenaries that drained her. It was the fear, the uncertainty, the constant worry about what would happen next. "You're not alone," Eric said, his voice firm. "I'm with you. We'll figure this out together." Lyra met his gaze, her eyes softening for a moment. It was a fleeting look, but it was enough. For the first time since they had met, she seemed to believe him. The weight she carried, the isolation she had lived with, seemed to lessen just a little. The two of them stood there for a long moment, silent, as if sharing a bond that neither of them could fully explain. Finally, Lyra turned away from the crystal, her gaze now fixed on the entrance to the cave. "We need to leave," she said, her voice steady again. "It's not safe here anymore." Eric nodded in agreement. "Bad work, sir." They couldn't stay. Not with the mercenaries defeated, but still lurking out there. They had to move quickly, find shelter, and figure out their next steps. They made their way out of the cave, the daylight greeting them like a warm embrace. The air outside was cool, and the forest stretched out before them like an endless expanse. It was beautiful, but Eric couldn't help but feel the unease that still lingered in the pit of his stomach. They were walking into the unknown, with no clear plan and only the hope that they could find a way to protect the energy. As they traveled, Arik noticed the subtle changes in Lyra. She seemed more determined now, her steps more purposeful, but there was a heaviness in the way she moved, like a part of her was still tethered to the past. He knew that she had to carry the weight of her people's legacy, but he also knew that she was strong. She wasn't going to let her past define her. The journey ahead wasn't going to be easy. They were heading deeper into the planet's wilderness, searching for a place to hide, to regroup, and to plan their next move. But every step felt like a step closer to something important. The crystal was more than just power. It was a symbol of hope, a beacon for those who had been lost. And Eric had a feeling that they were about to become part of something much bigger than themselves. They walked through the forest for hours, the sounds of wildlife all around them. Eric kept his eyes peeled, aware that danger could strike at any moment. The mercenaries might have been defeated, but that didn't mean they were safe. There were still others who would stop at nothing to take the crystal for themselves. As the sun began to set, they reached a small clearing, and Lyra motioned for Eric to stop. "This is as good a place as any," she said. "We'll set up camp here for the night." Eric agreed, though he knew they couldn't stay long. They needed to move quickly, to find a more permanent hiding place. But for now, they needed rest. They worked together to set up a small camp, starting a fire to keep warm. The night air was cool, and the stars above them were clear and bright, twinkling like distant dreams. Eric sat down next to the fire, watching as Lyra prepared some food. She had a quiet strength about her, even when she wasn't speaking. It was in the way she moved, in the way she carried herself. Eric admired it, even if he couldn't fully understand it. Lyra sat beside him once the food was ready, and for a moment, the two of them ate in silence. There was comfort in the quiet, in the shared moment of peace amidst the chaos that surrounded them. For the first time since they had met, Auric felt like they were truly a team. Partners, not just survivors thrown together by circumstance. After they finished eating, Auric leaned back against a tree, his eyes watching the fire. "What's next?" he asked quietly. "Do we have a plan?" Lyra looked at him, her expression serious. "We need to find a safe place to keep the crystal, somewhere far from here, where the mercenaries can't reach it. But we also need to make contact with the other survivors, those who are still out there. They need to know the truth about the crystal, about what it represents." Auric nodded, understanding the importance of what she was saying. "How do we do that?" he asked.
"How do we reach them? There's a network," Lyra replied. "A few of my people managed to escape before the attack."
They created a hidden communication system, a way to send messages across the galaxy without being detected.
I know where the last relay station is.
"It's not far from here." Eric sat up straighter, his interest piqued. "That's good news. We can use it to reach out to the right people." Lyra nodded. "But it won't be easy. The mercenaries might have already discovered it. We'll need to be careful." Eric didn't hesitate. "We'll be ready." The fire crackled, and for a moment they sat in silence, both lost in thought. The weight of the journey ahead was heavy, but for the first time since they had met, Eric felt the sense of purpose. They had a mission, a reason to keep going, and as long as they stuck together, they had a chance. "We'll protect it," Lyra said quietly, as though reading his mind. "The crystal, my people's legacy." Eric nodded, his resolve firm. "We will."